I am very comfortable with change, so I like to be able to move things around and shake things up every now and again. As I started to build my own team, I did have to adjust my style though. I did find early on that I was a bit of a micromanager and struggled to delegate.
I also did read a quote from you, and I forget where this was in an article, and it said, early on, my leadership style was once challenged when it was suggested to me that I should consider whether being liked was enough, and perhaps I should strive to be respected instead.
Yeah, 5 feet, it's about yourself. So 500 feet was the time that you spend with your team, and then 5,000 feet was sort of being at the enterprise level. I think that the feedback I received, which was really valuable and made me really reflect, is that
Lisa Dowie, a dynamic and results-orientated CEO, renowned for her unwavering commitment to customer satisfaction. As a people-focused leader, she balances compassion with an uncompromising dedication to success. Lisa's extensive background spans both technology and business, encompassing roles in finance, telecommunications, marketing, and prop tech. Her impressive journey has seen her thrive in esteemed organisations such as Census, JP Morgan, Telstra, ANZ, PEXA, and now Active Utilities. A self-described lifelong learner, Lisa continually expands her horizons, recently completing the Australian Institute of Company Directors course and exploring AI. Beyond her professional pursuits, Lisa is deeply committed to fostering diversity and empowering women in leadership roles. So Lisa, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
You've had a long connection with Emmbr, so it's great today to learn a bit more about your journey and particularly how you've arrived at your most recent role as CEO.
Yeah, it's great. It's not often you get a chance to sort of sit and reflect, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's not too painful.
No, hopefully not too many bad memories.
We'll take you back down that memory lane, and I guess what I was really curious about to start off with was to learn about, I guess, young Lisa. And what did you kind of hope to be as a grown-up?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I ever put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
I was a terrible student, I have to admit.
Right.
During my high school years, I gave my poor mum a terrible time. I certainly wasn't a studious person. I was really interested in sports, so a lot of my spare time was spent playing basketball, netball, athletics, swimming. You know, doing the schoolwork was sort of probably came third because then I was much more interested in social activities. So the one thing I did think I wanted to be when I was really young was a fashion designer. I've always had a love for fashion, still do. But there was one small little problem. Not very artistic, and I couldn't draw. So that turned out to be, not the case for me. But, tech was something that I was good at school, and I graduated in school in 1993, which sounds crazy to verbalise. But, the internet was really pretty, immature at that point, wasn't really popular or mainstream, and things like Excel and Word were just really new, and we were learning them at school, and I did information technology, and it was the one subject that I did really well in. It was the only sort of subjects I got A's in without really trying, so I sort of really loved tech from an early age, which I think, but never really thought about a career in it. However, I did apply for a few university places in tech courses, computer science, programming, and did manage to get accepted to a couple, but decided I wanted to join the workforce straight away.
Because again, I was looking at your LinkedIn, and it kind of picks up in 2002. So there's I'm going to do the math, about a 9-year gap there. So what was going on in those kind of 9 years? So my mum raised us on her own for most of our sort of life. So she instilled in me a very strong work ethic. She had me working at our local Target as soon as I turned 14 and 9 months. She was taking me down there to get working as on the sales floor. And then when I was at Target, they offered me a traineeship in management of retail. And because I was so sort of keen to get my own financial independence, I decided that I would take that on. Looking back, it was probably a great opportunity because what it meant was that I learnt the whole business. So from the distribution centres to the head office where the buyers are, to the sales floor, to the back where all the deliveries come in, to the finance and payroll. So you pretty much over the course of a year learn everything that it takes to run a store and what goes in, to support it in the back office. Did that for a year and then ended up going into retail management at Target and did that for a number of years, went to lots of different stores, helped open new stores because that's when Target was sort of in a bit of a boom of growing in Australia.
but sort of got to the point where retail hours at a management level were really demanding. You know, it was a lot of nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of time on your feet, sort of walking around all day, every day, and really then started to think about, well, what do I want to do with my career now? Where am I going to go from here? I sort of got to deputy store level, store manager level, and sort of decided that that was probably enough for me.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say I'm a little bit concerned that you associated fashion and Target.
I know. I did work in ladies' wear for a bit, you know, so that was as illustrious as it got.
So where did you go from Target? How long were you with Target, and where did you go from there?
So I was there nearly about 8 years from when I started at 14. But when and so I was in my sort of early 20s, thinking about what am I going to do next. And a friend of mine was working at a company that was building websites for businesses. At the time, it was called City Search, but it eventually got purchased by Census, which was part of Telstra.
There you go.
And so whilst I was good at tech at school, I hadn't really even seen the internet because my work at Target didn't involve anything to do with technology. And my friend said, there's a job here, but you need to be able to update websites. You need some basic coding skills. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And I went round to her house. I remember the night before I was going for the interview, and she showed me Alta Vista, if you remember that, as one of the big search engines. That was the first time I saw the internet. But went through for the interview and I knew in my heart that I would be able to learn it on the job. And I knew I had a friend there who was going to sort of probably give me a bit of help. And there was some customer service involved in the role as well, which I had ample experience in that space. So went for the interview, managed to get the role. And then so got to really hone some of my tech skills and work with a much bigger sort of organisation that had a lot of different tech functions within it. And when it was purchased by Telstra, that sort of got me into a much bigger business with a lot of other opportunities, which is where I then started to get into the project management space.
So there's a lot of things there I'm interested in. So that was when you joined Census in 2002. Mm-hmm. So that was your first kind of interaction with the internet?
Yes.
Because I often say this to people. I remember I joined a company in February 2000. And before that day, I'd never been on the internet and I'd never sent an email.
Yes.
And I remember sending the first email and then phoning the person and saying, did you get it? Right? Yes. And it's ironic because if you remember, there's a movie around that time, Tom Hanks, called You've Got Mail.
Yes, definitely.
So like today, it would be, I don't want mail, right?
Exactly.
Back then, it was still quite a novelty. Mm-hmm. So that was 2002. Mm-hmm. And I guess you're probably right around that time. It was still evolving. So your ability to kind of probably, I'm going to say, fake your way into a coding job.
Into a growing area.
It was probably a bit easier to achieve.
Yeah, definitely than it would be now.
There's certainly no technical tests.
No.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right.
So that's interesting. So your role with Census then, because my understanding was that was a kind of project management PMO-y type role. Was that not the case?
Eventually, yeah. So once Census was sort of purchased and then we moved into the bigger Telstra organisation, I was actually at a networking event where there was sort of different people from all sort of areas of Telstra together. I think we were celebrating potentially a rebranding or something along those lines. And got talking to different people, and they were looking for someone to come in and help run their project office. They were sort of looking for a coordinator of sorts at the time.
Yeah.
I said, it sounded like something I could do, made a connection with them. Eventually they reached back out to me and said, look, we're really advertising for this role now. If you're interested, put your hat in the ring. And so I did, and that was really how I first started getting into project management, which is where I spent, a part of my career working with various different organisations and tech programs of work.
When you look back now, do you think that was the most natural role for you?
Look, I think I've always been very detail orientated, very organised, very good at getting people to do what I need them to do. And I think a lot of that started from when I was at Target working with lots of people. I was quite young compared to everybody else that was sort of working at Target. It was a lot of sort of, I guess, middle-aged people that worked at Target during the day. There wasn't really very many young people. And I was sort of then, as a manager, having to work with them. So I think that taught me really early on how to sort of adapt my style, how to engage with people, how to bring people along for the outcomes that I was sort of working towards. So I think those attributes were really well aligned to project management and having sort of the governance and the discipline that was required. And I also had an organisation that was happy to invest in me and do some training with me as well, which was really helpful.
Yeah, and I guess, again, project management at that time was still relatively formative.
It was waterfall. Remember before project management, going through, it was a very sort of, rigid style compared to how it's done today in the agile world. But and it was very much something that you could sort of study. You had templates, you had practices. It was a matter of just having that knowledge and then being able to deliver them.
So it's a bit more kind of formulaic, plus the people skills to actually get the change to stick.
Yeah, that's right, because you can put anything in place for people and set out a process, but if you can't bring people on the journey, if you can't engage and connect with them, they're very unlikely to follow.
Yeah, interesting. Census as well, if I understand right, was kind of yellow pages, white pages.
Yeah, it was. I think that's how they sort of evolved into business websites, because I think they could start to see the decline in yellow pages advertisements.
Well, that was my question, because again, if I reflect back on that time, and I remember job boards starting to appear and things like this, and there was a lot of talk at the time that actually the kind of job boards would be the death of the recruitment industry. And actually the magazines that were kind of purveying that was actually the death of them, because print advertising spend, marketing budgets just reduced, and the money went online. And I was interested in kind of what disruption was going on at Census, but it sounds like that was it.
Yeah, so I was sort of in the business was all together. We still had the yellow pages and the white pages, but there was sort of this offshoot of building websites for businesses and then eventually bringing the yellow pages and white pages online. So I'm sort of able to see both, but fortunately I was in the growing side of the business, I guess the disruptor in a way. But it took a long time, and I think I've still seen that there are some telephone books that still exist. Yeah, I have seen them. Not very common. They don't deliver them to the houses like they used to. But I guess it was an interesting time in the world when you saw that sort of disruption. It was sort of the first, in my experience of working, where I was actually able to see that disruption happening and see it actually occur in real life.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, companies were starting to really think about technology and ways of reaching consumers and different ways to do that.
Yes.
And it was definitely an evolve or die moment for a lot of organisations.
Yes.
So, I think about the newspapers used to have the whole job ad section that just doesn't exist.
Correct.
But there you see the growth of Seek kind of coming out the back of that. And I never really thought about what happened to the yellow pages.
No.
I think back to those times, and I remember used to get the strongman competitions. They used to tear them in half. Do you remember that? Yes. I wonder what they do now. There's nothing to tear in half. And after you left Census, so I saw on your resume there was Telstra and JP Morgan. I can't remember which way round they were. Was it Telstra first and then JP Morgan, or?
JP Morgan was when I went to the UK, and then when I came back it was Telstra.
Got it.
Proper,
okay, so what took you to the UK?
Look, I was at my sort of getting into my late 20s, and I knew that if I wanted to go to the UK and work, they used to have this visa that you could get as an Australian to work for 2 years, but it cut out at 30.
Yep.
So I was really at that point where I thought, well, it's sort of now or never. And, I decided to go over. I thought London, everyone always says, how great London is. And I was fortunate enough to get a great job there at JP Morgan. I actually had 2 Aussies interview me. I remember walking in for the interviews thinking, this is going to be daunting, my first interview in London. I walk in and they were sort of like, I heard the Australian accent straight away, and I was like, oh, what a small world.
The office wasn't in Clapham or Hammersmith or something, was it?
No, it was actually in St Paul's, so right near. There you go. Yeah, it was in a really...
There aren't many Aussies that get that far east.
And I really felt like I'd made it when I was sort of there amongst all those, financial institutions that exist in that space around Bank and St Paul's. So it was quite...
It's a pretty inspirational place, I reckon.
I agree.
Because you look around and you're surrounded by iconic imagery.
Yeah.
And I think that with London, I always think it's like the theme park of cities.
It is, isn't it? You feel like you're in a movie scene just walking around, like it's
you can moment. Exactly right. Every corner you turn, there's Trafalgar Square, then there's Buckingham Palace, and so on. It's a pretty special place.
Yeah, but I have to say, I think it is a great experience to be able to go and work overseas, particularly when you go and you don't really have any connections there. You don't know what you're sort of stepping into. That unknown space is, I think it's a really good development for people to go through. I'd really encourage, anyone who's thinking about it to do it, because I think you definitely come back a different person in some ways, but also I think much more well-rounded and more open to, challenges and the unknown. Yeah,
definitely. I think you've got to stand on your own 2 feet. There's nowhere else to go really with that, and make connections, and it kind of forces maybe some of those pro-social behaviours.
Correct.
Otherwise, you just go back to an empty room on your own every night.
That's right. Yes.
It's pretty soulless. So that was a couple of years with JP Morgan, also in PMO.
Yes.
And then you kind of came back to Telstra.
Telstra, yes.
Again in PMO. And I think I saw there that you ended up as the GM for tech
yes.
PMO.
Mm-hmm.
I often think about one of my favourite quotes, and I'm sure this is attributed to Jim Collins from Good to Great, and it's be famous for something as the kind of secret to success. Mm-hmm. And as I was kind of looking through your resume, I was thinking, you're very humble, I'm sure you're not going to admit this, but you essentially become famous for PMO.
I did, yeah.
So I was just interested, what do you think, how did you go about your essence of PMO that made you that success?
I think it was the side of people and realising the connection in people, how powerful that was, and it was something that I really invested a lot of time in because I knew it was going to be the key to my success. And I think in the tech world back then, it wasn't necessarily so common. There was often different types of, not that many different types of people in tech. It was a lot of people that were quite similar with similar personalities who liked to operate in a particular way. And I remember I got some feedback early on when I was doing PMO in these tech roles where I'm sure the person I was working with thought it was good feedback, but he said, people are always going to underestimate you. And I thought, oh, that's it. I said, why is that? And he said, well, you're young, you're female, the way you look, people aren't going to expect a lot from you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I was sort of, at the time, I thought, oh, that's...
Is this a middle-aged man body?
Yeah. And I thought, why would he be telling me this? This is really interesting and something I had never actually thought about myself. But I sort of thought, well, this is a differentiator for me now. I should really, if this is the way people are looking at me, one, I need to act a bit differently and make sure that I'm putting across what it is I'm doing, where, the expertise I have, the outcomes I'm delivering, that maybe I need to amp that up a little.
Yeah.
But it also meant that people weren't going to be expecting me to do the things that I was able to do. So I was often able to surprise people, which meant I got people's attention as well.
Yeah, okay.
So I wasn't necessarily just sort of under the radar. Yeah, and I think that's why I sort of got a lot of opportunities, and then I ended up getting connections with a lot of people who then sort of invited me onto other transformational programs of work. And when they moved, departments within some of those big organisations, I would move with them. So I think those types of things really helped.
Yeah, that's great. Because a lot of people would take that feedback very personally and be quite affronted by it, let's say. Whereas it sounds like you kind of owned it and lent into it and said, well, fine, that could be my superpower.
Yeah, and I think I probably should have taken it more personally when I got it. When I look back on it now, sort of knowing what I know and who I am. But at the time, I was probably a little bit naive and, whilst I was a little taken back, I probably could have taken it a lot worse if I had have really thought about it.
You through that time, you also moved into a leadership role. And you could argue you've been leading projects, project managing, but managing a project versus people is obviously two very different things.
Yeah.
Was leadership a natural role for you?
I think it was. I think I was doing a lot of it, as you said, by sort of working with a lot of people, having to influence a lot of other people, because in my role in PMO, I was always had a lot of project managers who, whilst I wasn't directly managing, I still had a lot of responsibility for the outcomes that they needed to deliver. Okay. So I felt like I was always trying to influence them, bring them along, sort of keep them on the straight and narrow, so to speak. So I think in many ways I was always leading. But then as I started to build my own team, I did have to adjust my style though, because I was so detail orientated and so sort of in this regime of project management, I did find early on that I was a bit of a micromanager and struggled to delegate. Yeah. But learnt really quickly, because once you start getting more people and bigger teams, you'll kill yourself if you keep going in that way. So I really learnt quite quickly how I needed to sort of step out of the way and let people, do their best and really just create a great environment for them.
Yeah. Did you experience that through that as you scaled those teams up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was hard at the beginning to sort of make that shift when you're used to doing so many things yourself and doing them a particular way. And I think I was a perfectionist back then. I think I've sort of managed to kick that habit now, but I certainly did operate in that way. So being able to elevate out took some time and took some feedback from people as well, because I fortunately worked with some good people who pointed out that you're trying to do everything, you've got great people there, you've got to trust them, and that takes time to learn when you're new to leadership.
I think when your strength has been getting shit done, and you've built a reputation for that, to suddenly go, hang on a minute, now I'm going to have have to rely on other people to get things done.
Exactly right. That was my hallmark. I remember when I used to go for interviews with people, I said, look, if you want someone to get shit done, that's me. I'm the one. But so when that is at your essence of who you are, to then let other people do that can be a little uncomfortable.
It's pretty vulnerable when that is your trait. You reminded me just then, sorry, by the way, of I saw an Instagram post a few days ago that said, I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah, so that's me.
That's you. That's what you made me think of.
Yeah.
I also did read a quote from you, and I forget where this was in an article, and it said, early on, my leadership style was once challenged when it was suggested to me that I should consider whether being liked was enough, and perhaps I should strive to be respected instead.
Yes.
But I liked your response to follow on that. You said, I never thought these two traits were mutually exclusive. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it had never really occurred to me that I couldn't be both of those. And I think when someone says that you're liked, for me, that means that I like connecting with people. I like getting to know the people that I'm working with. I think it's really important to know the whole person, not just the one you see at work.
Yeah.
So I think when you do that connects to other people, and then they do like you. But I think you need to do that before you can actually get their respect, because I don't think that you have to do one or the other. And I remember I was really affronted by that, because I had always thought you could be both. And then when I thought about it a bit more, I think that was probably an old school way of thinking. And, another nickname I had from some people I worked with, which sort of resonated with me that I can be both, is that I was the Velvet-Sledgehammer. Oh. This was back in my project when I was doing PMO days, and I sort of took that as the fact that I can engage with people and connect, but when it comes to actually making things happen, I can do that as well. So I think that also means that you can be liked and respected.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think that traditional old school leadership style was I'm not here to be everyone's friend.
Yes,
I've certainly sat there and seen or heard leaders come into the business and make that statement.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about friendship necessarily, but I still think that the contemporary view is you need to connect with people.
Absolutely.
You're going to get more done. And perhaps, that's been a byproduct of the greater diversity that we now see in tech, in particular. That some of those ideals are being broken down, and there is much more of a kind of human level.
Yeah, and you want to have some fun at work. You spend so much time there, and whilst what we do at work is always very important and serious, but at the end of the day, life is, you only got one life. You actually want to be enjoying what you're doing, enjoy the people that you work with, and have some fun and laughs if you can.
Yeah, 100%. I often say to the leadership team at Emmbr, my kind of measure of success, or one of the measures of success in the office, is if I hear laughter, and I see people with a smile on their face and enjoying themselves, then we're probably doing things right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't quantify that or put a KPI on it, but when it goes quiet and you see heads down or there's less interaction, something's not quite right.
Yeah, agree.
I think it's a pretty good barometer. From the role at Telstra, things just kept getting bigger for you, and you ended up at ANZ as the GM for PMO. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking that must be about as big as it gets in the world of PMO.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So when you look back at that time, maybe at ANZ, kind of getting to that peak, so to speak, what was your biggest learning?
I think it was saying yes to opportunities, because while I was at ANZ, I did a few different types of work and worked in a few different areas. So I started sort of in the real tech space of ANZ.
Yep.
And then I moved into their global shared services. So I got to see a lot of different programs of work with a lot of different types of people, a much bigger organisation. So I think I got to see and learn so much through that time at ANZ, both good and bad. There was a lot of onshoring and offshoring that was going on during that time, but also that taught me so much. It wasn't always the most pleasant work to be involved in, but certainly taught me a lot about business, about people, about how to go about change, skills that I've really been able to take with me throughout my career.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the time at ANZ because it was really challenging work, a lot of complexity, as you can imagine in an organisation of that size. And, when I look back now on some of those really challenging times, they actually are the best, sort of some of the best memories that you end up having.
Yep.
Even though whilst you're in them, they feel really tough and heavy.
Yep. But
looking back on them now, they're some of the most satisfying, I guess, and best moments.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think if you can get stuff done in an organisation the size of ANZ, you can probably get stuff done anywhere.
Anywhere, that's true.
Well. Yeah. I noticed actually that your tenure at both ANZ and Telstra was around 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, do you think that's the right amount of tenure in a PMO type role?
I'm not sure if there's a right. I think it depends on your personality and who you are. I am very comfortable with change, so I like to be able to move things around and shake things up every now and again. So I did a lot of, some of those roles were contract roles as well.
Okay.
So that was a deliberate choice not to sort of be somewhere for a long time. I think it's good to do that, particularly when you're at sort of younger, middle stage of your career. I think to do those varying different roles, work in different industries is really, a great idea to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Again, I hadn't really thought about that, but you sort of JP Morgan, Telstra, ANZ, you've
lots of different industries.
You're kind of ticking off a lot of boxes there, aren't you? So to speak. Again, look, it's interesting. I always think 3 years is a pretty good innings.
Yeah.
As in, you've got enough time to go in, develop a plan, execute the plan, but not get stale.
Yes,
or kind of live off your legacy of something you did last year.
Yeah.
It kind of keeps you a bit more honest, I think, in some ways. But as you say, there's potentially multiple roles you can have within an organisation that kind of get a bit disguised by that. But I guess that was probably my other question around that, which is how did you know when it was time to move on for the next challenge? What were your triggers?
Yeah, I think for me, because I was often involved in programs of work, often it would be the end of a program that would be a time to actually think about, okay, what next? Do I want to stay on? There was often always opportunities to move on to the next program of work or whatever it might be. But I think whatever sort of career you're in, often there are points or milestones that happen that are an opportunity to pause and sort of just think about, is this where I still want to be? I've been at organisations that have been sold or, there's often big things that happen. And I think sometimes those milestones are the time where you actually think about, what do I want to do, and do I want to be a part of the future, or am I ready for something new? Am I still fresh? Am I still jumping out of bed with that excitement for the role? Am I still loving, going in? I think if you ever get to that point where you're thinking, I don't want to go in there today, or you're more looking forward to the weekends more so than you ever have, I think those are the times where you start thinking about it's time for a change.
Yeah, I think at that point the question is, am I tired and need a break?
Yeah, correct.
Or is this actually a bit more deeper than that? And actually, you make another good point there as well in terms of the end of a project. I think in working in PMO or working in tech, you kind of get these natural punctuation points where there is a transition between this and that, and that's probably a fairly good time to make that reflection. Maybe other careers don't have such maybe definitive moments.
Right. Yeah.
And that's probably an opportunity for someone in tech to really work around those.
Yeah.
You then made a really bold move because you left an enormous corporate with all that, and you went to a startup, which then became your home for the next 10 years. So I'm going to say it was a good move.
It was, one of my best moves, I have to say.
And PEXA was a fresh startup at that point, and not just a startup, but a whole new concept.
Yes.
I kind of describe it as electronic property conveyancing.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Try and put a label on it.
Yeah.
What drew you to the opportunity?
Look, I knew someone who was working there. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have ever come across it. But someone reached out to me and said they were looking for a PMO. Of course, that's what I was known for. I had recently settled a property myself, so I had been through the conveyancing process.
Got it.
And I remember I walked into a lawyer's office and they pretty much walked me through this trail of paper and folders on the floor, and I signed all these documents. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, this is archaic, this process. Could hardly believe that that's what it was. So when this came up and I heard about PEXA, which was going to, transform the whole industry and digitise that process, I thought it was at least worth a conversation when they said, you want to come in and have a chat about it, which was another piece of good advice that someone once gave me, which was always have the conversation, because often things come across that you might not be interested in, but at least have initial chat, because you never know, in the future that person could be somewhere else or whatever might happen. So I went in for what I thought was going to be sort of one discussion at PEXA with the CIO at the time. It turned into 4 speed interviews with 3 other people as well.
Yeah.
And I think I was pretty much offered the job on the spot, and I sort of had to stop and think about it for a moment. I almost didn't take it because I was sort of, it was a bit of a risk at that stage because PEXA was so early on.
Yeah.
They only had a small amount of funding to get started. There was no guarantee that there'd be a business in 6 or 12 months' time.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I was in a position where I could sort of take the risk, and I thought, yeah, sure, I'll give it a go, and started there in the PMO, which was a really big program of work. We had Accenture as our partner.
Yeah.
It was a $300 million program of work to build the PEXA platform.
Yeah.
So whilst it was small when I joined, it was a big complex piece of work to be involved with, which was another thing that really interested me as well.
Yeah, look, it definitely snowballed pretty quick.
It did, yeah.
It's interesting because I think there's how can I frame this? There's a lot of people maybe that work in corporate and they love the idea of a startup, but the reality of a startup is some of those Instagram moments, expectation versus reality.
When you walk in,
Was there any moments when you kind of thought, what the hell have I done here?
Yeah, lots of moments, because it was really chaotic in the early days. There was just, when you start a job at ANZ, everything was set up for you. There was processes, there was an intranet, I guess it's cookie cutter in a way, but then when you get to a startup, nothing really exists for anyone, and you're lucky if you have a laptop a week after you start because they're still going out, running out and buying them and getting them set up and all those types of things. So there were definitely a few moments where it was sort of like, have I made the right choice early on? But I think that dissipated pretty quickly after about the first 6 months, because I think it becomes, working at a startup becomes almost sort of like contagious and addictive, because you've got a really clear mission where you've got, a small group of people who are really the driving force behind getting it up and going. And when you believe in what it is you're doing, and you can see that this is going to be, we could see that this was going to be a huge benefit for the Australian economy, for everyone who buys a home, which is a massive part of, big decision in your life and an emotional transaction. I think when you really believe in it and you can feel the purpose and feel like you're going to be a part of something pretty special, those sort of early day concerns dissipated pretty quickly. Yeah,
I think that's a good point. I think when you're in the right startup, you can really embody that mission.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, and this is not a criticism of ANZ, but joining an ANZ, an established business that's been around for forever and will continue to be around forever.
Yes.
It's very easy to feel like a small fish in a big pond. And I think when the mission of a business can become part of your identity.
Yes.
I think that's like a 20, 30% uplift in terms of commitment to what you're doing as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's a special, and I'm really appreciative because I know that they don't come along that often. I remember our founding CEO at the time, Marcus Price, he sort of kept telling us that this is almost a once-in-a-career opportunity that you're having, and he obviously could see that it was going to be, and many of us were sort of like, we're going to have plenty more of these surely, but now I can sort of reflect and think, it probably was just that one moment, and we were all very lucky to be a part of it.
Look, and they're the special moments. I think really when you feel you are part of something that is kind of changing the world.
Absolutely.
And it literally did change the world of conveyancing. So you started out there, say, building the PMO, which coincidentally was 3 years.
Yes, that was 3 years.
And then you moved on into the GM around direct operations. I think, So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I guess the platform was built after the 3 years, and I could sort of see in my mind that sort of the tech challenge and complexity was almost reaching its peak.
Yeah.
And I heard that there was an opportunity that the big problem at PEXA at the time was getting customers then to use the platform that they had built, because there was an initial thought, build it and they will come. But of course doesn't always work. Whilst we thought it was a great solution and surely everyone wants to digitise this process, lawyers, conveyancers, banks are all really busy. So to drive that change across the industry was a real big challenge that PEXA had to face into.
Yeah, right.
And they really wanted to take a programmatic approach to how do we go about solving this problem. And my name had been floated around that maybe I could be a good person to move over into the operations side of the business and start to head up, a bit of a test really to see can we start to move the needle by doing things a bit differently. And I was sort of thinking about it, and I think I probably thought about it a little too long. And the next thing I heard is, no, they've decided now they're going to go external and advertise for someone to come in and do this.
Yeah, okay.
And it was at that moment that I thought, hang on a minute. Now that someone's sort of taking this away from me, I actually really want this. And I think probably initially it was the fear of leaving behind almost, a 20-year career that I'd had in PMO and running, large transformational programs of work. And I'm going to move over to operations. Sort of that fear of that, I think, was holding me back. But when I felt like it was being taken away from me, I remember I sort of marched straight upstairs because someone told me this in a coffee shop downstairs.
Yeah.
Ran straight upstairs and sort of went into both the CEO's office and the COO at the time and said, look, I've heard you're considering going external. I just want to let you know that I want this. I'm the right person for this role.
Yeah, right.
Give me a go. And both of them said, that was all they needed to hear, that, that I was really keen for it, passionate about it, and they were prepared to give me a go.
Maybe that was their tactic.
They got
maybe. To pick you up to
reverse psychology.
That's right. You have to go and ask them to see if that was a bit of gamesmanship or whether they got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Did you sort of have a mentor or anything that helped you make that transition?
Not that transition, but not long after, I did have a mentor who helped me, I guess, once I was in the role and dealing with, all that, the new world I was in, really. And I was really lucky that PEXA put me in touch with Alyssa Camplin, who is an Australian Olympic gold medalist in winter aerial skiing.
Yeah.
And she was also an executive at IBM, and she was on the board at Collingwood. Yeah, right. So really accomplished in both sporting but also business. And she really taught me a lot about, I guess, courage was the first thing, because she was doing, flips and things in the air. Yeah. But also she taught me to sort of look at my career as a business, like using all the principles that I would use, whether it was project management, whether it was what I was doing in operations. But, I was always very data-driven, metrics, milestones. She was teaching me I should be applying a lot of that to my career. Okay. And thinking about, whether it was setting goals, whether it was allocating time for my own development rather than always just giving everything I had to the work that was in front of me.
Yeah.
And so she played a really big part in, my career development at that stage. And so too did both the CEO, Marcus Price, and the COO at the time, Mike Cameron.
Yeah.
I think they both saw something in me that I hadn't probably recognised myself, and that was the potential they saw in me.
Yeah.
And they really gave me a lot of confidence, but they also pushed me into a lot of probably areas where, whether I was ready or not, they didn't really care. They just sort of pushed me out of my comfort zone a lot. Yeah. And I think that was a big sort of turning point in my career. Once I started to realise that a number of things that I was probably fearful about, I could actually do and I could conquer. Yeah. I think that really was sort of when I started to, I guess, unleash myself in many ways and sort of left the shackles that I probably felt I had from, that I was going to be in PMO forever.
Yeah.
Really was able to see that I've got a huge opportunity of, different things I can be doing in my career going forward.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like those people, or PEXA in particular, they saw the hidden potential in you, let's say.
Absolutely.
And then created an environment for that to thrive.
Yes,
by
absolutely.
Putting the right people around you to make sure that you felt safe, probably safe to fail at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to push yourself out that comfort zone.
Yeah.
At the time, did you feel that? Was that something that or is it now kind of retrospectively looking back, you realise that?
No, I could definitely feel it at the time, because I knew that they were sort of giving me a lot of different options to do things. At some point, Marcus wanted to take a step back from a lot of, whether it was media or being sort of the face of the business, and started to push me into that direction. Yeah. So I could see that there was definitely a view here that they were sort of getting me ready for more.
Yeah.
And it was definitely stuff that I had never had, experience in before in the PMO world. I wasn't out, doing crosses to 9 News for, there was lots of different things that PEXA sort of pushed me into, which really helped me grow in so many ways.
Yeah, fantastic. And it wasn't long after you moved into that role that you moved up again. And I wasn't sure if that was an advancement of that role or a newly created role, but you moved up to the Chief Customer Officer.
Yeah.
So what kind of excited you about that role?
Yeah, well, it was the first Chief Customer Officer that PEXA had. Yeah. So it was both exciting and scary, because there wasn't necessarily someone for me to model myself upon. It was a new role that was created.
Yeah.
And it was almost, it was growing with the business. So it was in some ways an evolution of my role, because as our customer base started to grow, and the network was growing, it was decided that we needed a much more focus on our customers. And given I had been the one that was working with a lot of them, I was probably the obvious choice. But it was certainly, my first time at having a seat at the executive table. So it was a whole new world, dealing with directors. The company went through a sale and an IPO during that time. So it was, the opportunity to really operate in a different space. So I was both excited and terrified of it when it came about. Yeah, definitely. But I got to do so many different things in that role that I had never probably dreamed of doing.
Yeah.
And, the one thing I really learned was just the benefit of getting out of that comfort zone, and probably something I had avoided a long time in the PMO space, right? Because I had become the expert in that area.
Yeah.
And there was very few things that I didn't know about how to run large programs of work. So I felt really safe and comfortable, and any question I could always answer. Yet then here I was in this chief customer officer role, had no one that I had watched do that role. It was totally brand new. So I was fully out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
But now I've really learned to embrace that side of anything. Anytime you can get out of your comfort zone, I think is when the magic really happens.
Yeah, great. Did you look to any kind of external chief customer officers to help you succeed?
Definitely did, yes. I had a few connections that I had made. I had the benefit of going on a trip to Silicon Valley with a number of female business leaders from Australia.
Yeah,
so there was lots of different people, a few chief customer officers, but lots of different female executives, some also new in their roles, some still forging their path, some really experienced, but also well connected with lots of different businesses. So I certainly tapped into that network to really be able to learn from others.
Yeah,
that's
really
great. Important.
I think that's it can feel quite lonely, particularly as you say, which I hadn't really considered, but you were the first person to ever do that job for PEXA too. So there's no one really to benchmark yourself against.
No.
And that probably needs a lot of, I guess, a great relationship with the CEO to say, am I delivering what you expect? And kind of internal compass to go with that.
And the big thing, I think, that the feedback I received, which was really valuable and made me really reflect, is that I needed to be able to ask for help when I needed it. And I guess one of my sort of core values is independence.
Yes.
I really like to be and that's probably stems from a lot of my work I did as well. But I had to really, be vulnerable and ask for help when I needed, and not try to be the expert on everything, which I was so used to being.
Yeah.
So that was really a learning curve that I had to sort of push myself into as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we talked earlier about the transition of you going from kind of project leadership to people and functional leadership. And then this is another level again, isn't it?
Yes.
Because in that kind of functional people leadership, there's a degree where you are expected to be the expert. But once you're at this level, it's a reversion back, I guess, to probably being the person that asks the right questions and provides the right direction and input strategy.
Yeah, that's right, and creates, a great environment. I certainly learned in that space, that in that chief customer officer role, that, my job was really to, solve problems if they came up that people, couldn't quite get across, remove hurdles for them, create a great environment where they could sort of be their best.
Yeah.
I also learned, I did a course at INSEAD in France, which I had a great opportunity to meet a lot of other executives from across the world, and we learned about we learned about the leadership altitudes, which they talked about. So sort of at 5 feet, it's about yourself, so spending time on your self-development. I think 500 feet was the time that you spend with your team, and then 5,000 feet was sort of being at the enterprise level. And if you spend sort of too much time in any of those areas, you get altitude sickness, because it means you're not sort of in the right area. So I think that sort of basic methodology allowed me to really think about where I spend my time, and making sure that I wasn't sort of getting stuck at the team level, which was where I was probably really comfortable and where I enjoyed being, but making sure that I was spending time, for myself, but also at that enterprise level as well. So it's a good gauge to sort of keep a check.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it, isn't it? I think your nature is to get things done. So you're going to feel most comfortable at this level, right? Is that fair? Is that kind of, when you look back now, where do you think you're at your best? Which level?
Now I think I've probably got much more comfortable at that enterprise level. But I think, again, it's never one. It's knowing when to drop in and out, I think, is the key, because it's no good being great at either one of those. You need to be able to get to all of them, and you need to be able to see when are the times to move in and out, and really make sure, there are some times you need to really just spend time on yourself as well, and making sure that you're at your best, so that you can give your best, whether it's to your team or the
100%.
business. So I think... I really enjoy the enterprise level now, but I think it's, as I said, it's just about getting in those right levels at the right time.
Yeah. During the time at PEXA, as you mentioned, you went through a sale, you went through an IPO, which was, I think, $3.3 billion.
Yes.
So it's not small. What would you say were your main lessons or takeaways?
I think it's certainly around embracing the challenges that we came across. It was certainly, whilst it sounds like a great story, it certainly wasn't easy. And I think, one of my skills, I think at the time, was facing into difficult conversations. And I think that's something that not everyone can do. And whether that's around when things aren't working well, it's getting onto them quick, whether it's if person is not working well, whatever it might be, but not always just painting a good picture, not having good news story all of the times. I think it's really important to be able to have those tough conversations and to have them quickly, because a lot of times I think organisations or teams let things sort of fester for a while. So I really like to sort of get on to things quite quickly, and I like to think I've got a pretty good instinct when things aren't going well or as well as they should be, to really act quickly on those things. I think it's really important. I think the other one is that you don't have to stay in your lane. I think sometimes people get feedback or advice from people that you sort of need to pick an area where you want to be the expert in and sort of make sure you continue to build upon that. But I think PEXA taught me when I made the move from tech to operations that you don't have to stay in your lane. And I think actually, in my case, huge opportunities came out of by jumping into a different area.
Yeah, I think so. It was interesting. We had a guest on last week, and she was talking about how she moved from CIO to CFO, and the CFO moved to CIO.
Yes.
And the exec essentially all switched seats, and we talked about the learning from looking at the business from a completely different perspective, and probably the appreciation and the ability they were able to bond as a group and work together through those switching lanes. And I thought there's not many companies or organisations that have the courage to go down that path. I
agree.
I was interested in what you said about difficult conversations, because I think that is something that people find difficult. Is how to get that right. What do you think is the secret to handling a hard conversation?
It's just realising that we're all people at the end of the day, and most people have positive intent. They want to do, whether it's a good job, they want to be able to do what it is you need them to do. Everyone's sort of always striving to deliver on the outcomes that the business has sort of set out for them. So I think it's keeping that in mind, that everyone's got positive intent, trying to understand the person that you're dealing with, or people, whatever it might be, just being transparent and honest, speaking in simple language. Some of the organisations can get caught up in so much of that business jargon. I think just speaking to people like you would, a friend or whoever it might be, but trying to keep things simple as well, I think is really important, and focusing on, the problem. What is the actual challenge or problem? What's the difficult thing that we're all facing with, and actually speak about it, because sometimes, everyone talks about the elephant in the room that exists, whether it's in the boardroom or meeting rooms. Often people just don't want to talk about that thing. So I think trying to get things like that on the table and doing it often and keeping them front of mind makes those difficult conversations become much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. There's Jordan Peterson's a fairly divisive character, but one of his rules of life in his book is don't leave things in the fog. And it's one that I often think about when in those situations. Is there something here being left in the fog, and people are choosing to ignore it when really we need to shine a light and have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Great. I was interested, through that time, we partnered with PEXA, and we hired a lot of people, and we used to talk within the business about there being a very distinct PEXA person.
Yes, yeah. What were they?
I'm not sure it's fair to say. I reckon Christine would be able to give you a much better answer, because she pretty much lived at PEXA.
She did.
I think for a few years back there.
I bet you one of them would have been to be able to deal with a lot of ambiguity, I'm sure.
I think it was. I think it was definitely that. It was someone that could pick something up, not need a lot of detail, and could kind of go away and figure it out for themselves.
Yes.
But I was just interested because it was such a distinct culture. I think was probably what my reflection was when I was thinking about today. And you don't drift towards culture.
No.
It's something you shape mindfully.
Yes.
So I was just interested in how you and the leadership team at PEXA shaped that culture.
I think the beauty that we had is that we had a really clear objective, and it really didn't change over the first sort of probably 6 or 7 years of the business existence. And I think having a group of people who are all really clear on what that objective is, and also how their role plays a part in achieving that objective, was really powerful. And I think also we had this mentality, I think, which is quite helpful, is that so many people said it couldn't be done. You know, there'd been a few incarnations that had tried to do what PEXA was doing at various different state levels. And so I think when you have that mantra around proving people wrong, or that we're the group that is going to do this and we will be successful at it, is quite empowering as well, and something that people really want to get behind.
Yeah.
But I think also we had a lot of fun at PEXA. You know, we worked extremely hard. There was a lot of, you know, tough times, but we celebrated a lot of the successes. But we also faced into the things that we didn't do well either. We certainly didn't get everything right all of the time. So I think celebrating the successes was really important, but also surfacing when things didn't go well and what could we learn. So I think that created that environment of trust and safety amongst the people. Yeah. And I think that's what you need when you're trying to do something that's quite audacious or that people think can't be done. You want people to push themselves, but know that it's going to be okay if they don't succeed, and if we mess something up, we'll work it through together. And I think that's the leadership team that I was a part of, was really a group that trusted each other, which can be quite rare sometimes at that level. You never really felt like anyone was out to get you. You always felt like everyone was supporting each other. We had each other's backs. And I think that flowed through the organisation as well. When you see a leadership group that is really tight and supporting one another, backing each other up, that flowed through the organisation as well.
Yeah, I think people can kind of, I don't know, smell it from a distance. I don't know what the right phrase is, but when a leadership team isn't on the same page, or they're not cohesive, and then people, I think it's human nature, they kind of they expand those cracks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it creates division. And I think for any team or business to be successful, it doesn't mean you have to agree.
No, that's right.
But there has to be trust and respect, and a kind of common approach to things.
Absolutely.
Through your career, you've also been a huge supporter of women in tech. And I was just interested, and it's interesting actually the feedback you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
But I was just interested if there was any kind of barriers that you've experienced or seen firsthand for sort of women in technology.
I think it's certainly changed a great deal. I mean, I think back to when I was working in the early days, you know, quite often I was the only female in the team, in the room. That was certainly not uncommon. Yeah. But I think now it's obviously, you know, so much better, and it's probably never been a better time to be in technology, in my view, given the importance that we now place on diversity and inclusion and seeing how that works. I think particularly for a female to be in tech right now is the prime time. There's so many opportunities. The environment is, you know, so great. But I think in the early days, you know, that example I gave of feedback I received is probably, you know, gives you a good sense of what that environment was like at the time. Probably didn't realise it, you know, as much myself, but reflecting back on it now, I can see that it was probably a tough space to be in, and it was probably one of the few. But I think I'm really believe in, and it's well proven as well, I mean, the P&L speaks for itself when you've got diverse teams, and finally everyone believes in it now, or at least they say they do. There are still, you know, there are still elements, I'm sure, where it's not always happening every day and everywhere. But, you know, having that diverse thought in the room delivers the best outcomes. And I think having women, I think the flexible working that we have now as well is a great enabler for women to be able to advance their career in whether it's tech or any industry. I think that was a real prohibitor for many women. So, you know, as I said, never been a better time for women in tech right now. I just think it's about embracing the opportunities, making sure that people go after them as well. Whether it's men or women, I think it's just a great time to be in tech.
Yeah, look, 100%. I think, again, there's a couple of things there. I think, you know, probably with some of the disruption from COVID, one of the positives is the more probably adoption, let's say, of hybrid working, which is going to, I think, improve diversity in terms of broadening things. It was actually interesting. I did some research on this a few months ago, but actually they reckon that the highest participation of women in technology was back in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
The 90s. And then as the job became more technical, more women kind of got turned off to it,
right?
And went towards other careers. Whereas that's obviously now the tide's turning, and the university participation in STEM courses. And so we're definitely heading back on an upwards curve, but it's interesting we're not yet back at the peak participation of women in technology.
It's amazing.
Globally, that is globally. I couldn't speak for Australia. If you were giving advice to an organisation that wanted to think about diversity, what would be the sort of one thing you would tell them to do?
I would hope that there are not many organisations left that we'd have to tell what you should do. But I think it's really just having that open mindset for everybody, and not just for women, but bringing in different thoughts, different experiences, different backgrounds. For me, it's more of a why wouldn't you? I think it's a no-brainer in so many ways, but it's all about the environment that you create in a workplace, I think, is really important, and the culture that you foster. As you said, cultures don't happen by accident, and if you want to have a diverse and thriving culture, you've got to create the space for that to actually occur. So you need the leadership group. It does start at the top as much as you 100%. Want to think, people can create a groundswell at the end of the day. So having that leadership team that represents the type of organisation that you want to have is, I think, one of the very most important steps. So having the leaders that people can see and aspire to, I think, is really important. And, I certainly see that even in my current role. The role that I play, hopefully, is going to inspire, other women to strive for those types of roles as well. So
definitely. Look, I think role models are critical. It was interesting when we started putting this podcast together, actually, and we started to reach out to people in our network that we knew and said, hey, would you love to come on?
Yes.
We'd get instant yeses from men.
Yes, right. Women a bit hesitant.
Yeah, and not necessarily hesitant, but just needed more detail or more information, or can you kind of explain?
Yes.
And we realised we got to episode 10 and we'd only had 2 women on the podcast. And we sat down and said, well, that doesn't really represent our network or what we believe in. And we realised we actually needed to probably be a bit more encouraging and speak to some of the women that are taking part and ask them to advocate, to encourage that participation. And I'm pretty pleased to say by the time we get to episode 25 in a few weeks, we're about 50-50.
Yeah, great.
Or thereabouts. But it made us stop in our tracks and think, well, we have to invest in this to get to what we want to get to. It's not just going to happen because we know we've got that diverse network.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the investment is really important because, lots of businesses decide where they're going to put their funding and what they're going to put their money into, and diversity is one that you have to actually invest in as well. Absolutely right.
And I probably should have framed my question at the start around this a bit better, because you're right. I think most companies are aware to it, and they would like better diversity, and they see the value in diversity.
Yeah.
But maybe their efforts are misplaced. And I think that's probably what more my question was, which is where should you place your efforts? Which I think you've answered. But
well, I think investment is really important. So whether it's how you invest in developing the women within your organisations, or you have the right policies in place that encourage women, so that can often come down to parental leave, childcare. There's lots of those different things, flexible working, as we talked about. Those things I think are really important to create the right foundational pieces. And making sure that women are getting the opportunities. They don't need to necessarily be the same. Sometimes women need specific opportunities to be presented to them. And as you just said with your example, more encouragement. So then that comes down to the leadership team or the managers, that they are sort of encouraging some of their people to take that step, because it doesn't always come naturally for women to put themselves forward.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's right. So late last year you left PEXA, which I can imagine after 10 years that's probably quite difficult.
It was a big decision.
How did you know it was the right time or was it the right time for you to move on and do something?
Yeah, I think it was. 10 years is a long time, and PEXA definitely took a large part of my life. It wasn't a job that you could do without giving it, necessarily your all. So I think there was an element of almost being tired by the time I got to that point, but had recently gone through the IPO, which was probably one of those last big milestones that I wanted to achieve at PEXA, but obviously didn't want to leave immediately after. Of course, wanted to see the business through and make sure that it was still stable and successful. So there was about 18 months after the IPO that I decided that it was probably time for me to start looking for the next challenge, and felt like I had accomplished many of the, things that I wanted to do, but also I had set up a really good team of people who I knew were going to be able to take the business forward. So again, it's another one of those milestone moments that happens, is a time to sort of reflect on what do I want to do next, and do I want to be part of sort of the next evolution of the business? And that's when I decided that, it was time for other people to step in and take it forward.
Yeah, great. And you took a well-earned break.
I did. Career break, which...
Was that easy for you to do? Because you've clearly got a very strong work ethic.
I do, yes. I was worried, and my husband was worried about me too, I think, for a little while, wondering how I was going to cope. But made the decision to travel because I thought if I'm just staying at home for months on end, I will definitely go insane and probably drive my husband insane.
Yeah.
So we decided to go overseas. So we were fortunate to be able to go on, it was about a 4 or 5 month trip.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, which you don't get to do very often.
No.
And also it was a very unique experience for me to be on a holiday and not be thinking about work, because I do find it a little difficult at times to fully switch off. So to be traveling and just to be fully in a relaxed state and not thinking about what I'm going to be coming back to or what's happening while I'm away or checking emails or any of those things, just to be totally carefree, relaxed was a great way to travel. So I would highly recommend a career break for anyone, and not having any thoughts about what I was going to do when I did get back is, a very free feeling to have, and something I hadn't had in many, many, many years, and really enjoyed it.
Did you find yourself towards the end of that break starting to think about, okay, what next?
Not while I was away, but when I came home and I was sort of, back in Australia and having a bit more time then on my hands, I wasn't having all these new experiences and seeing new countries. That's when my mind started to sort of wander a bit more and start to think, what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
And I was, having a lot of coffees with people and talking about business. And my husband would tell me when I came home from one of those meetings that it was like I'd almost had a drug of some sort, because I'd be on this high because I'd been out talking to people about business or opportunities. And that was sort of the prompt for me that I started thinking, I think I'm ready now to start thinking about, because when I sort of left PEXA, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next, whether I wanted to work full time again. I was thinking about boards. I did do the AICD course for company directors. So I thought I would do something like that. But then I sort of got the taste that I really wanted to get back into another executive role, and, really wanted to start thinking about a CEO role.
Yeah, right. Okay. Because so you obviously joined Active Utilities as CEO. I was going to ask you kind of what drew you to that role. How did that come about?
Well, the role was presented to me as an opportunity, and there was a lot going on. There was a lot of private equity sort of coming into Australia, buying businesses. So there was no shortage of opportunities, which was nice, that there was lots of different things going on. And, I was looking at lots of different businesses, and for me it was really trying to get a feel for the type of business it was. The culture, having come from PEXA, was really important to me, that I wanted to be able to have an influence on the culture, but also wanted to join a business that already had a great foundation. Yeah. And I guess the deal breaker for me is I wanted to join a business that was going to be growing.
Yeah.
So that had become, something that I was really attracted to after doing that at PEXA. I couldn't really get my mind around going and just joining a business where I would just run it as business as usual.
Yeah.
And most of the private equity opportunities were growing businesses. So it was really about finding the right space. For me, I was keen to look at another industry, which is something that I've done throughout my career, is sort of look at different industries, and Active Utilities is in the energy space, so something I had no experience in whatsoever. However, it does have sort of a touch on the property space as well, what we do, because we work with multi-tenant buildings, so whether that's residential towers, commercial towers, shopping centres, retirement living, all of those big buildings is what we work with. So there was a bit of an overlap of slight adjacency, given it was in the property space. It was a growing business. I got to know the people. I got to spend a bit of time with the outgoing CEO. So I really got a good feel for the business, and it really felt like the right fit. And I really liked the idea of who the owners of the business were going to be, which is Prime Super. And the asset is being managed by a company called Patrizia. And when I met them, I felt a real difference between their ethos versus some of the private equity businesses that I'd been meeting with, who were sort of more burn and churn, get the business, turn it over, and kick it off for a sale in a couple of years' time, whereas this is a much more longer-term investment, which really appealed to me.
And is that where it's connected with the super fund, do you think? What drives that?
Yeah, I think so. They've got more time. They're just looking for a stable, ongoing return, I think, is much more appealing to me than a quick turnaround.
Yeah. And there's some people that want the quick turnaround, right? They want to get in and make a difference and then kind of get out. But my kind of sense from spending some time with you is you're much more interested in building something sustainable for the future.
Yeah, really. I think leaving a legacy is something that's probably become more important to me, I guess, as I get older. I really want to have a positive impact on whether it's people or the industry. I think that has become really important to me, and realise that that's a driver for me now.
Yeah.
So having the opportunity to have that sort of impact is really important, and was part of the decision-making process.
Yeah, great. You're about 6 months in now, and I'm always interested to hear how leaders and execs kind of set themselves up for success in a new job.
Yes.
Because it can be, quite daunting. You kind of go in and particularly when you've spent 10 years somewhere and then you're back and you're the new person.
Yeah, the new one.
Again. So how did you sort of approach your first sort of few months in this role?
Yeah. So definitely, I think in the first 3 months, I did a lot of listening. So really trying to get to understand the business, the people within the business, the customers, the stakeholders. So I spent a lot of time having, whether it was one-on-ones, attending events, listening to meetings, and really tried to not make any quick decisions on anything, because it's really easy, I think, when you come into a new business that you want to make your mark and you want to make some changes. But unless you've got, enough information to make those decisions well, I think it can be quite risky. So I really held myself back from doing hardly anything really in the first 3 months, just a lot of listening, getting to know people, really trying to get to understand what's the essence of this business, and then starting to work through what the strategy is going to be for the business, because I sort of took over the business with not necessarily a plan in place, and they've got new owners. So one of the sort of big first activities was to sort of start to set out a strategy for the next 5 years, which is quite a daunting thing when you're just joined an organisation. Fortunately, there's so many great people within the business who have been there for a long time. So that's definitely another strategy, is to tap into the expertise within the business and let them, drive a lot of the activity, and sort of listen to them. They know this business better than anyone. And really try to foster just the collation of their ideas and start to form the strategy and test it with them and test it with others outside of the business as well. And really then get some external help as well. Having a facilitator come in to help us formulate the strategy, I think, was really a good decision that I made, because, I could have quite easily led that myself, but not knowing the business as well as everybody else and wanting to participate rather than directing the traffic, I think was a good step. And also having sessions like that where you are thinking about strategy with a new team is a great way to get to know each other as well. And as I've talked about, I love connecting with people, and sometimes it can be hard to do that in the day-to-day throes of business. But getting people off-site, spending time together was a great way to get those sort of deeper connections with a wider group of people. So I think it's really been about holding myself back. There's lots of different things I would love to implement, and I can see there are so many great things that I've done in other businesses that I'll be able to do at Active where I am today, but it's just taking it slowly as well, because I've worked in businesses that have new managers come in or new leaders, and you want to see that they understand the business before you start making wholesale changes. So it's been really important to me to spend that time.
Well, and particularly because you're a doer.
Correct.
Right? So
I really have to hold myself back.
That's right. But you are right as well. And, similar to your time at PEC, so I was with the business 16 years, group Match Tech Group, and we achieved some great things. And it's very easy to go into a new role.
Yeah.
Well, at Match Tech we did this, and suddenly the eye roll creeps in.
Yes.
It was, people know it was great, but it's a new version, and you've got to kind of pick those best bits and kind of apply them in the right way. And so it's hard as a doer to sit on the sidelines and observe and think, but we could do this now. You kind of got to bring that together. But it's interesting how you've put that strategy together as well with such engagement. But equally, I guess it's also trying to find a mixture of the capability of the business, the needs of the customer, and probably the expectations of the investors.
Correct. Yeah.
And trying to find that kind of that it's like a big Venn diagram.
It is.
You're trying to find the bit in the middle of where your strategy is going to exist somewhere in that point.
Correct, yeah. And I think the next 12 to 18 months, probably where, we've got a much clear focus on, so which was really about there was a lot of opportunities that existed for the business. So I think my role was to really start to narrow those down to let's not try and do everything, and which is often the case. Everyone has the best intentions and wants to capitalize on so many different ideas, but let's just narrow them down to a couple, and let's really, put our bets on these for the next 18 months and really start to deliver on those rather than being this widespread of trying to 100%. Do everything.
Well, it takes us back to Jim Collins, right? Be famous for something, right? I think if you can really make your mark in something, it's easier to expand that into other areas.
Absolutely.
Than trying to kind of be known across multiple different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Look, my next few questions are a bit more broader and not maybe specific to a certain moment in time. You're definitely going to need a water. Sorry. What are you most proud of in your career?
I would say I'm most proud of the people that I have worked with and who I've seen go on and do many different things in their career. I probably didn't realise early on just how important that was to me, but certainly now, developing career paths for people, whether you're mentoring them, whether you're their direct manager, whether it's just someone that you've given advice to at a point in time. I'm most proud of seeing those people that have gone on, whether they were once at PEXA and they've left, whether they're at active, whatever they have done, that's where I take the most pride in seeing people who go on and have great careers and who might choose different things, and just really realising that the impact that you have on people has really made me, I think, much more considered about what I say, how I say it, the feedback, how I give feedback, given that, you know, we've all received feedback at some point in time. Yeah. So, I think it's really having that impact on people and seeing them go on to do great things is what I'm most proud of.
Yeah, great. Do you have any career regrets?
Yes, I do. I have a secret, I guess, some people know, but I used to have a real fear of public speaking. Oh, right. And I only got over it probably about 10 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And I wish that I had have faced into that so much earlier in my career. And it was a crippling fear. Like I had become an expert at being able to dodge it and get out of it and find ways to find somebody else to do it. Yeah. And this was at PEXA that I sort of got forced into having to get over that. I just really wish I had have done that so much earlier in my career, because I think things could have been different. I don't know, but I just think I would have enjoyed my work so much more if I hadn't had that constant fear of having to worry about when's this next time going to come up. They're going to ask me to speak at something.
Yeah, there you go.
Which I think is why everyone says, step into the fear, embrace those fears. That, it really is true, because it's your own barrier that you're setting for yourself rather than something that's tangible. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Easier said than done.
It is. I agree.
I think it's advice that people always say, get uncomfortable or get comfortable being uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
No, which is, I think that's when you need those people to force you into those situations. And I think that's how I got over mine, is that people could see that this was something that was probably holding me back. So they really kept forcing me into those spots. And once I sort of did a few, I actually started to realise,
and they can shut you up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Have you got a mantra or a quote that you live by?
I don't really have a mantra or a quote, but something my mum always used to say to me, and I have said this to a few people, which I think can be taken in a few ways, is that the cream always rises to the top. Yeah. Or another way of sort of putting it is every dog has its day. I think being kind, being a great person, looking after people, I think in the end will win out, is sort of the way that I see that playing out in workways. And I think also it plays into about your reputation. Something that I've worked through, realised through business is, particularly Australia, but even if you get to either Melbourne or Sydney, really small places when it comes to everybody knows somebody. And even though you might put forward references for a job, there is a whole heap of other reference checking going on outside the process where people are asking about you. So I just think always holding yourself to your own values, what you believe in, sticking to those. I think whilst at times you might feel like, maybe I need to be more cutthroat, or maybe I need to be more aggressive on these things, I think it's really important that you just stay true to you. Yep. And as my mum said, the cream rises to the top eventually. And I think being kind, being a good person and having a great reputation is, holds a lot of weight in this day and age.
Yeah, that's great. We've talked a lot, I think, through this conversation about feedback we've received. But is there any specific significant feedback you've received in your career that was really impactful to you?
I think it probably was when someone once said to me that the only thing that's stopping you from doing, anything you want is yourself.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that it was really a big moment for me to realise that, other people can see this potential in me, what I need to be able to see it myself.
Yeah.
And I think once I realised that, it made a huge difference for how I would face into these fearful moments, how I would put myself forward for opportunities. I think that's really when I started to take that on.
Yeah, great. If you had a singular piece of sage advice for the next generation, what would it be?
Next generation. Get off the phones. Even though I was saying to you before how much I am a multi-devicer. No, I think it's similar to when I said about always have the conversation. I think always saying yes to things, being open-minded, I think, is the most important. And I think actually the next generation coming through is probably way more open-minded than many were when, you and I were coming through our careers. But I think, being open to possibilities is the most important advice that I think I could give to my younger self or the next generation. I think would be really important.
Yeah, great. We kind of touched on, with your altitudes, talked about looking after yourself and personal development, and we talked earlier before this about podcasts.
Yes, yep.
What's your kind of recommended podcast?
Well, I have a very varied range. I like to listen to true crime. I like to listen to pop culture. So I listen to Mamma Mia out loud for my pop culture. The Lady Vanishes is a true crime podcast that I would highly recommend. And I Built This is one I also listen to, which features a lot of different entrepreneurs and talks about the journey that they've been on and the trials and tribulations. And I think it really, when you hear so many people talk about the challenges or what they initially set out to achieve, often changes by the learnings that you come up with during the journey. So I think that's another great podcast that I would recommend.
Yeah, great. Look, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure.
You've been really generous with sharing your story, and it's just been really insightful to hear the different transitions and the way you've kind of gone through your career and your life. So thank you for sharing.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.